Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cartographer office hours to the December, sorry, December that's 13th. And well, this is the last meeting, last office hours meeting of the year. We'll be resuming on the second week of January and updating the calendar accordingly. So with that, let's get started. Okay, first thing will be the note-taking role. I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer or want me to trigger the wheel of names.
I have not taken notes yet. So
Thank you, Ishima. Thank you. Okay. There was before this, let me put here from previous meeting, there was an action item. It was checking out CNCF project. I've been checking several CNCF projects, their contributing guidelines, governance docs, and all that. The RFC process is not especially widespread. It's interesting to see very large projects that leave a lot of the criteria to choose what is a large change to the contributor, or just to ask a question in the Slack channel. That's it. So it's interesting to see that we have an RCF process. I found nevertheless the gRPC project, a very large project. They have also an RFC process, and here they have some criteria to see if the change you are proposing actually fits into the RFC process. Features, process changes, anything that change the public API also is considered something that falls into RFC criteria. And it's interesting because I also explore some projects outside the CNCF umbrella, for example, React. They also have a RFC process in place. And again, the word feature is there. So kind of the common thing between these processes is that if you are planning to introduce a new feature that also changes the public API, that's something that goes under the RFC process. Also, well, removing features. And yeah, for example, for React introduction of features or some other functionality that involve multiple languages. Also, it's part of the RFC process. So it's just information that could potentially be useful for the RFC process improvements that we were discussing last week. So just wanted to point that out. Okay.
Before we
Okay.
move on,
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, that's good information. And I think for us to get some action on this, we have an issue to document the RFC process.
Yeah.
But I feel like we should propose the RFC process, and that work should actually be done maybe as a part of that story. But instead of the story being, I mean, it can either be an RFC so that we make sure that that's how we ratify it, an RFC itself, or we put something together on that issue, but we make sure we bring it to a public meeting next year.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. So I would say the action item will be to update the issue. I don't remember the issue number, but I can find it. Let me see.
It was an early one for sure.
Yeah. Well, I can update that later on
Okay.
with the number. The RC process issue with patterns from other projects, let's say.
Well, I think with a proposal that we should bring. I think we
Okay.
should update it with a proposal or create an RFC off of it that we should bring to the group. What do you think?
Okay.
Like, I just feel like this thing will never really get done until we've, one, try to document what it should look like and then get some argument about whether that's acceptable as a first stint, a first go at what the RFC should, how you should pose an RFC and what constitutes one.
Okay. Oh, so. Got it. Cool. Anything else? Or we can move to the next item. That will be RFC 12.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been hanging out for a while, and Josh and I ended up talking about it recently when we were doing params, because the new implementation for params means that you no longer have to specify at the top of a template default values for params. If there isn't a sensible default, just align it and expect that the workload will provide it or the supply chain will provide it. While Josh thought that that logic made sense, one of the things that we lose is, well, the necessary parameters were previously self-documented. You could just go and see at the top of the spec, like, here are all the parameters that are required. And I said at the time, well, this is much more sensible and also much more comprehensive. There should be some reconciler that's just going over to every template that's submitted and using its great machine brain to be like, okay, here are the things that are required in this template, and just put them in an easy to read list down at the bottom of down in the status of the object. I've put an example here that's kind of like a nested structure. It could also just be a flat structure. So every place where you see, where you see at the top of the template, it says service account name, workload.spec.service account name. Maybe we just put that entire string down in expected inputs. Right now I've got a nested structure, but I'm not tied to that. Yeah, pretty straightforward.
So I would like to see, because I don't know if you remember, but I told you I had a dream of this and then asked about it, and you says, oh, I've got an RFC open on it. So I would like to see the defaults on ones that you can supply alternatives. So parameters that I can fulfill is more useful than parameters that are required. All right. So if they have defaults, but they can be overridden, I'd like to know about them as well, and I'd like to know what they default to. So I'd like to see that added. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The second part is, I'm trying to think like how to best. Yeah, I suppose every parameter would just be a list of both the parameter name and then the parameter default value.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I assume that we omit parameters that have in a template there isn't. Yeah.
Is there such a thing now? You can override everything, can't you?
You can override everything in a template. I guess the question would be, presumably we're going to build on this work and have a similar status on supply chains for the.
Oh, what's this a status on? Is this only on the template?
This is just. I think this is just on the template. I'm trying to pull it up myself because it would be valuable to have it on the supply chain as well.
I guess
that's more important to me. Yeah.
I'm missing the value of putting the inputs on the template, because like as it reads right now, I'm reading, all right, input workload metadata name, but I can see that 10 lines up, in the template.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm not understanding the value.
So it just comes from, like I said, that conversation that I had with Josh, that his perspective was that he would want to have that easy to read list, and not have to go through and parse the template. So that's the value there. The second order value is that then when you have the supply chains reading these and putting status on a supply chain, that you can parse this easy list instead of having to parse each individual template. It has to be done at some point.
So I should have kept this. I should have kept the branch. I did a spike on this, and it's fairly easy with the tooling that you created to extend it to not need this on this document to get the supply chain documented. I mean, because it's really quite straightforward code, right? So I definitely want to see it on the supply chain. I didn't realize this was on the template. And I propose that when you're putting together the supply chain, you throw in the templates you want, you apply it, and you go, oh, now I've got my list of all of the parameters I might want to override or fulfill. And the documentation is done there where I think it'd be most useful to me as a supply chain author. I actually think it'd be better on the first place that I would look would be on the supply chain status. And I also would really like to see this on the workload if that doesn't break some kind of like
permissions, privilege
thing. Issues, yeah. The workload too. I'd like to know what parameters are being weighted on for me to be successful.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to have it on the supply chain. Like,
so,
I guess I'm still missing the value because like it's the.
I'm take a step back.
I'm not. Hold on. I don't doubt that I'm not saying like you are 100% behind this idea and think like you had a conversation with Josh, great, but like it's still the template author who wrote this in the first place, so like they put the inputs there. That's all. The inputs to consume. So. And
then the operator has a little bit of work to do. I think that's what Josh is probably saying, right? The operator has a little bit of work to do when he goes to consume. She goes to consume this. They say, what's the parameters I need to fulfill in this? And I feel the most valuable place to document that is in the supply chain. What it does is it assumes that people develop their supply chain, iteratively applying it back onto a cluster with the templates handy to see what the results are. And then we get a nice resolving list of all of the parameters that are or need to be fulfilled by the supply chain.
So to be clear, or to clarify, up at the top, summary says templates and supply chains should report in their status what input fields are expected from workload. So this in no way is meant to exclude supply chains doing that. And I can certainly write up an example of like, here's how a supply chain would do it. I think that, so I then have two questions, because one question that I was coming in with, and the reason I put in the example was, what actually should it look like? And what should that structure be? Because I'm not totally sure about that nested structure. And now I have a second question of, are other devs saying that they think including these input fields on the templates is unnecessary work, that we shouldn't do that work? Or are you saying, let's do that work, but also let's totally make sure we do it on the supply chain? Because I don't disagree. Like, it makes sense. I would start with the supply chain
personally. Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting start with the supply chain. And if anyone ever says on the templates that they'd really like to see it when they apply it, then let's do that work. But where huge value comes in my mind is in the supply chain. It'll also help, I'm sure, I'm totally hypothesizing, but I have high confidence in this hypothesis that anyone trying to build visualization or assistive tools would find the one on the supply chain very valuable.
I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely want to see the default values. I didn't even think beyond parameters. All right. I think you might be I think it might be easier if you were talking about the structure. I think the structure could just be exposed as keys, like the full key that you would normally use in a template style template, a dollar parens template. That key would probably be more than adequate.
So when you say keys,
You were talking about the structure, so I'm
trying
saying
to-
flattened, like you suggested with the keys being like spec dot. Sorry, not spec dot. Workload dot something or other.
Nice.
Yeah.
Flat list.
I mean, it's just an opinion, but I think easier for machines to work through. They can decide whether the structure is important or not. My only concern is those would never have defaults, right? So you'd never mention default. You just do value. No, you just mention the name and you wouldn't mention a default value for it, I should say. So,
Okay.
so some of those like
So-
workload and input, right?
Yeah. So there's one thing in terms of the status that we have here talks to sources, and I guess that goes away, like because the supply chain need not specify to the workload author, like here's what values I'm passing between. So we're just looking at a list of the workload, essentially metadata spec,
The owner
and
refs. Yep.
the params.
Yeah. And can we generalize? The other thing I'd ask is, can we also generalize the language? Because this is true for blueprints and owners, sort of thing, not like blueprints instead of supply chains. Now that we've got names for them. But I'm very keen on this idea. I think it will help resolve what's going on. And then I'd be really curious to see if we'd like it on workloads and deliverables. But that could definitely be a separate.
So the idea would be that the workload would pick up from. Are we just trying to get like early validation that the first thing through before starting to stamp?
I think
check and see if you've provided all those values.
I think
the status.
I don't think it's the provided values that. Like I know that we say, hey, we didn't get this value. I'm also not sure if we list all of the items when we miss. So when a workload misses, like there's 5 params, right? And 3 of them must be provided. They don't have defaults, all right? And if you miss the first one, I'm not sure if we bother to list all 3. So this is a way we could ensure that we list all of the ones that we should have provided, but we can also list the ones that you would never get a warning about and would never learn about unless because they have defaults on them. It's just, there's a broader discussion then about, do we want to expose these? Do we have to have hidden or something else going on? I hope not, but
yeah, I think that my expectation would be if you are providing a default, that you are expecting your users to.
And there's no way you would discover that,
that's the
right?
default.
Especially if you're not allowed to list the supply chain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Trace the RFC to focus only on supply chain.
Okay. Great, thank you. Looks like we should move to the next one. Do you agree? Reusable template.
Okay. So this one is simply that those params we were just talking about, the ones that come from the either the blueprint, the workload or the deliverable. if I'm writing a template that is capable of doing something that would work just as well in a delivery as it would in a supply chain, it cannot be reused today, because I would type something along the lines of, especially if I was referencing the owner. So I might type workload.name to create the name for my object, and then you could not use it in a delivery because it would have to be delivery.name. And so I would prefer that we just genericize on owner, even though people aren't entirely attached to owner. It's what we have today. It's in our docs at the moment. We could always rework at that as well, but I think it's a separate issue from the fact that there's no reusable term.
Yeah, so one that totally makes sense to me. I assume you say we could just use an alias. I assume that you're saying like, yes, let's use an alias. Let's not remove the ability to reference a workload, but rather add the ability to reference owner.
Yeah, but I wouldn't document the ability to reference workload and supply chain. I would just expect people to reference the owner. And I mean, we don't have backward compatibility concerns at this moment, but I know people are already using it. So in this case, I'm just like, let's be kind. Let's just use an alias.
Yeah, I think we mostly do have backwards compatibility issues now, because if we make a breaking change, we'd have to cut
This
a new
counts
release.
as a feature.
It would be a breaking change, and then we'd have to cut a release, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
We have to cut a lot
that.
of releases, in fact, yes, because people are already depending on us. Yeah, it's true. I mean, we might put a little note, but I don't think we'd put any focus on it in the documentation to go with the story. I don't know what I meant about the compound naming thing there. I really don't know. If anyone can think of a problem when there was a delivery and a workload in the same namespace. Oh, I think it's because there's a template that could then emit an object that decided to name itself based on the owner's name. And it would now have a problem of emitting it twice. Sounds like something I can put in the documentation. Or is that, I mean, it doesn't fix anything, right? Because I bet when you make the other, I bet if you made the others, like if you made a template and you went, oh, this only works with supply chains because it references workload. Oh, and they're going to need it over there on delivery. I'm pretty sure you would create that template by copying it, renaming the one ref, and then renaming your template, and completely ignore the same problem, which is, oh, if anyone tries to use this in the same namespace, we're going to get a name collision, right?
I mean, would we get a name collision? Because it's totally mediated by Cartographer. So if you have a workload and a deliverable in the same namespace with the same name, the supply chain reconciler is only going to look for the workload, and the delivery
The object is trying to
reconciler.
stamp or collide.
Yeah,
I think,
like you said,
that's what I was saying. Yeah,
that's not a new problem. Yeah.
No, it's not a new problem. And this way we get to document, you might run into this problem.
So then how would you tell them to not run into this problem?
I would tell
Just have
them,
unique names for the deliverable and workload.
add the ability, yeah, or consider it, and however they're architecting their end-to-end. I mean, the most common cause of this sort of scenario is that you would name your delivery the same as your workload, right? Instead of maybe just calling it that thing's delivery, or realizing that you would have this problem. I mean, again, it doesn't apply to this story. Either way, you'd have to think to yourself, I need to say something here, add something, maybe support a parameter called prefix just so that people can use something other than just the default of their workload or deliverable name. This conflict will happen either way. So I think the action item there is to add a thing to make sure that we document making reusable templates and the risk that comes with that.
I keep losing my tab with the notes.
If no one has any major objections, just wanted to sound out a few people on it.
Very cool. Thank you. Anything else to discuss or share? No. Okay. Well, thank you for your time and see you in the next year, in the new year. Thank you.
David, one
Yeah.
thing that I wanted to mention, you said that the first meeting is going to be the second week of the year. I wonder, because of Daniel and James' schedules, if we should make sure to have a meeting the first week of the year.
Okay. Yeah, I won't
Or-
be available the first week of the year, but
There'll be quite a few people out at that time too. Some
Okay.
people take their week off before, some take it off after.
Sounds like somebody's taking it the week after. Okay,
yeah.
that's fine.
So, okay. Cool. Yeah, we'll see how can we arrange this. But so far, the goal is to resume on the second week of January.
All right.
Cool.
See everyone then.
See ya. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thanks.
Happy holidays.
Happy New Year as well.
Happy New Year. See ya. Thank
Bye.
you.